it's unclear to us exactly what Donald Trump is up to, which is equally as pertinent in some ways, because we've got news only today that he's tiring of the sticks he's using against Russia and looking more towards carrots.
Now, The Times has looked at how the spirit of Ukraine is being erased behind Putin's Iron Curtain. There's now been a decade of occupation in the Donbass. Evidence suggests that Russian propaganda and brutality is now so entrenched that it's pulling Ukrainian families apart. This is in part two of the special report by Catherine Philp, Times World Affairs editor, and she joins us now. Welcome to Times at One, Catherine.
Hi, Joe.
How much of Ukraine is behind that curtain of Russian occupation?
It's about 20% as it stands of territory, less than that of the pre-war population, because millions of Ukrainians have voted with their feet against that occupation and moved either overseas or to the rest of Ukraine. So yeah, there's a difference between the territorial occupation and that of the people.
Right, and what's happened there? What is this process of stripping away, if you like, Ukrainian identity and culture?
Yeah, well, it's firstly, it's clearly not random. It's systematic, because we saw it begin in 2014 in those areas of Ukraine that fell under Russian occupation. And what we saw after 2022 was similar systems or parallel systems being extended into those areas that were captured by the Russians. I think the difference in 2022 is it became even more brutal and sped up, because essentially what happened was the Russians would target all the existing structures of authority. So mayors of villages and towns, anyone who had a sort of connection to that idea of authority or Ukrainian identity and rule, was systematically detained, often tortured, in some cases executed. And those systems of governance replaced by Russian ones.
Right.
Now, more broadly, there's been sort of attacks on Ukrainian identity, in the sense of, so you no longer hear Ukrainian spoken in those areas.
Right.
It's effectively outlawed. It is not taught in schools anymore. The curriculum has been replaced by one that promotes Russian, imperial and Soviet history, and tells the story of Ukraine as being part of Russia, not a separate entity.
I mean, listening to you and reading your reports, I mean, there's understandably so much focus on the military and strategic gains and losses, and of course, the massive loss of life. And yet, this process that you have described is a pernicious and divisive side of the war that can really go under the radar. I mean, tell us about your compelling story about Marta.
Yeah, so Marta was an 18-year-old girl who was born in Donetsk, which actually fell under the Russian occupation in 2014. She was living in Mariupol at the time, and she was only 7. Her mother, as she said, changed overnight, became pro-Russian overnight. She was, they actually spoke a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, which is quite common in that part of Ukraine. But her parents took her back to Donetsk and actually chose to go under Russian rule. And she grew up there, kind of thinking, this isn't right. There's something wrong here, missing the Ukrainian side of her identity, missing the language. And she recognized what she was being taught in school as propaganda from a very young age. And I think this is interesting, that it's been often harder for the Russians to bring over the younger generation who have that memory than some with memories of the Soviet Union. So pre-1991. And in 2022, when the full-scale invasion happened, she resolved that she would leave. I mean, she had an abusive family as well. So clearly that, she wasn't as attached as she might have been, but there was obviously this schism in their sense of identity as well. Anyway, she ended up having to wait 3 years before she turned 18 to get the paperwork to escape with the help of a Ukrainian organization. And she's now in Kyiv, having come right through Russia using the Russian passport that was imposed upon her by the Russian occupation authorities,
Yes.
and then came out through Belarus and managed to get to Kyiv, where she's now studying in Ukrainian, using Ukrainian language all
I
the
mean,
time.
well,
And
it's quite a story. I mean, it
yeah,
really is about this one woman. But then you can imagine and can sense that it's very difficult to fight against this process of stripping away sort of Ukrainian identity, and the Russian passport, if you like, has become a ticket to a normal life.
that's right. So they've made it impossible for you to really access any services. You can't register your property without Russian citizenship. And, a lot of the people who have stayed, I mean, predominantly older people who stayed in the occupied territories, have done so because that property is all that they have. And so obviously they're going to take the paperwork that means that they can register it. And what's very difficult to see is, how you stop this from happening. Other than, of course, there are pockets of resistance within those areas, and people who liaise with the Ukrainians and feed them back information. But as long as the Russians have the territorial control there, it's very difficult for those people to, to get out from underneath this kind of propaganda, this brainwashing.
Right. I mean, it is fascinating and heartbreaking to listen to. But let's talk about the so-called peace process, or any attempt to bring Zelensky and Putin together. I mean, do you get the sense this is just Vladimir Putin stringing everyone along while Russia takes as much territory as possible in order to extend the negotiations?
In one word, yes. I think it's unclear to us exactly what Donald Trump is up to, which is equally as pertinent in some ways, because we've got news only today that he's tiring of the sticks he's using against Russia and looking more towards carrots. So coming out with talking about doing some sort of energy deal with Russia to seduce them rather than force them to coming to a peace. But Putin, it is important. It can't be said often enough that this is not just a territorial issue. That Putin is messianic about what he wants to do in Ukraine, and he thinks he's winning on the battlefield. So there is no incentive unless he is forced by external forces, and the pressure on the Russian economy brings it to a point where it can no longer prosecute the war. There's no incentive for him to stop.
Catherine Philp, I should say, the Times' World Affairs editor. Thank you very much for joining me and talking to us at Times at 1.
How long are you willing to let this play out? And if they don't meet, will there be consequences, and how soon for Russia?
Yeah, there could be very big consequences, but we'll see what happens. There might be very big consequences because this is something that has to end. This war would have never taken place, and for 4 years it didn't take place. But if I were president, this war would have never taken place. From a national security standpoint, but we have a powerful thing. So we'll see what happens over the next week or two, and at that point I'll step in very strongly, and if I have to be there, I'll be there, and we'll either have a deal or we won't. But a lot of people are dying, and I want to get us. They would say, but we gave you land. I said, no, you didn't. You lease us land. There's a big difference between.
Mr. President, when you met with Russian President Vladimir Putin, how soon did he say that he wanted to sit down with Ukrainian President Zelensky? Russia, as of now, says there's no meeting on the books and no agenda is set.
Well, that's going to be up to them. It takes two to tango. I always say it. And they should meet, I think, before I have a meeting and probably close the deal. But I think it's appropriate they meet. They do not exactly get along well, as you can understand. And I'm sure it's a meeting that perhaps he didn't like. But he wasn't happy about coming to the United States either. That was a big concession, and I appreciate the fact that he did. I've always had a very good relationship, despite a fake Russia haunt that we had. But we've always had a great relationship, very good relationship, strong relationship with Russia. That's a good thing, not a bad thing, by the way. And you know what? He did great. It was a great press conference, actually. It was historic. I doubt he's done one since. I believe that we're going to get that war straightened out. We're going to get it done. I don't know that they'll meet. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. They'd like me to be at the meeting. I said, you guys ought to work it out. It's between you. It's not us. But I looked in and I saw more rifles pointing at me than you could. There were a lot of rifles. I thought this would be, in many ways, the easiest way. I have a very good relationship with Putin. I thought it would be the easiest one to stop, and it's really not. It's very complex. It's very personal from their standpoint. There's tremendous dislike personally between the two men, and we're going to have to straighten that out. But I would like to see them meet first. They'd like me to be there. I may be there. I may not. I'll see. But I wanted them to work out their differences first, because it is ultimately between them. And when that happens, I think we'll get an end. I have a great relationship with Kim Jong-un. I don't want to say it that way. I think it will.